Let's have a video about where I'm going to be selling my altcoins if things are not going the way that I predict them to be going. It's going to be a fun video because you also need to discuss the topic of when things go south. So let's get started. During these markets, I'm always looking for opportunities to build my portfolio, and OKX is bringing you an opportunity. They are the first fully licensed exchange in Europe with the lowest fees. And to help you a little bit with your portfolio and to celebrate this milestone, they are giving away up to 50 euros in Bitcoin if you sign up today on the exchange. Signing up can be done within 5 minutes, and if you deposit 100 euros worth of crypto, you'll receive the first 20 euros in Bitcoin. Start rebuilding your portfolio today. Go to the link in the description or scan the QR code and enjoy up to 50 euro in Bitcoin. I can't say that the markets are doing great, but I can say that there are some interesting signs still taking place, and the markets are moving upwards briefly in a very gradual way. That is super boring, but that is super strong. So if we look at the markets, then compared to the past few weeks, most of the altcoins are starting to crawl back up. And if you look at any example where an upwards market starts, it needs to start with an accumulation and then a very boring state of going up. Just a little few percent every day. Every week, I guess, instead of every day. That is how a vertical or parabolic move starts. It starts with that boring state. And I think we are at that point where we have seen some interesting build-ups or signals that might indicate that we're getting more into a risk-on appetite. And if you look at the Chainlink chart, then you can see that in the bottom of the chart, the markets are trending up slowly before it starts to accelerate. And the more it starts to go up a little bit, the more the sentiment starts to switch, the more investors start to jump in, and the better the outlook starts to look for that actual project. So for instance, if you're having the best fundamental news during the most depressive periods of time, the fundamental news will most likely not have any impact at all. While if it starts to go up a little bit, people will come back to that fundamental news and rewind that news again, and all of a sudden it's curing cancer. That's just how the nature of the markets work. And the beautiful aspect of Web3 and crypto is that it gives you every ingredient in every phase of the cycle within the window of a few years. So if you look at the markets and if you read tweets and the sentiment and start to learn what signals you're getting at what stage in the cycle, you can quickly improve your game. And that is, I've got the lucky fortune of being in my third cycle, my third rodeo at this point. So at this point, I start to get a little bit of a grasp, I think, about what stage of the markets we are currently into. And then I've brought some interesting charts that I wanted to bring up that are not mine, at least the first two. The first one is from Julien Bittel. It is the old DXY chart where we compare the move of the DXY with the price of Bitcoin. And it basically tells that based on this chart and the historical price action, history has proven that the best bet you could do is to go full risk on. Because if you look at the historical price action where the DXY made such a volatile move in a week where the standard deviation is more than -4, the signal was that it's the actual low in 2015 on that part of the cycle. It's the actual low just barely after COVID. It's the actual low where FTX collapsed. It was identically during the same week as the DXY made such a move. And it did it again. So after that, at least Bitcoin has been making a tremendous return. And most of the time, altcoins have been significantly outperforming since that actual move, which indicates that perhaps there is a slight delay in the outcome on the altcoin markets, but it can prove that the bull market hasn't even begun at all. And there is still a lot of upside to come. And on every occasion, going risk on has been an extreme return, and the altcoin markets were at the actual low during most of these actual events taking place. On top of that, we have the Fed that is reducing QT and might signal increasing QE during the last second stage of this year. So that's an additional argument that's likely going to yield an additional return on the assets that we're currently investing in. Then secondly, if we talk about the Fed, there's a chart of tech dev, which I favor a lot, which is basically saying that liquidity goes back up or is breaking out upwards, and that is usually a signal where the markets are going to tend to turn upwards in the terms of the altcoins. And he basically explains with his chart that there is a parabolic altcoin signal starting to occur, which is similar to the one that we had in 2020, where we have a gradual move to the upside and where we are just about to break the all-time high, where we just had a retest. And if that's the signal, then there is an argument to be made that the altcoins are going to do well. But the counter argument is that there are a million altcoins at this point, which was also the argument during 2021. The VC unlock game was also an argument during that exact cycle because it existed already. And yet the altcoins provided a high return based on hype, based on new liquidity, based on liquidity that centralized around certain narratives that did well. If you recall from the previous cycle, not everything moved up. There were a lot of coins that haven't moved at all, mainly from 2017. So you need to pick the right ones. You need to pick the infra that's actually going to do well. You need to pick the blue chips, and then you'll be fine. And finally, the total tree chart, this is my chart, has a massive bullish divergence that is still valid. And we approved that bullish divergence by creating a higher low and by securing that we retested the old resistance for support again. So all those signals are good, but yet we can have another outcome, which is that we start to drop again. And then at some point, I need to start setting my altcoin positions if I'm going to do that. So let's talk about where or how I'm going to sell those. Selling your altcoins is very hard to say at certain price levels. Well, at this point, I'm going to sell. And I know that some people are doing it, and actually some people are doing it right. In my thesis, when I'm having this strategy, it's more coming down to fundamentals than coming down to those strict price levels. And I'll get back to that. But there are some things that I'm looking at in terms of selling positions or rebalancing my positions. And the first chart that I wanted to bring up is the most important one. There is a constant debate on the reasoning why ETH is not moving at all. And I think it has to do with macroeconomics. It has to do a lot with, for instance, the nature of an investor. So if the markets are more eager to go risk on, that is usually a temper where ETH is going to bounce back up against Bitcoin. And I think that if you look at this chart, the ideal correlation can be seen. So if gold does well or trends up, then usually ETH will not do well. If gold goes sideways, that is a period where Ether usually starts to trend upwards significantly, or at least if the volatility is going to go away from gold going up, that is when ETH against Bitcoin starts to move up. So in that sense, I think that we're going to have the exact same occurrence, in the sense that if gold is going to turn around or is going to peak, first of all, we are making a massive bearish divergence on the monthly time frame here. So my gut feeling or my intuition is saying that if gold is going to reverse in the coming few months, then I'll be having a great period in my assets. And if gold is continuing its upwards turn at this point and doesn't correct, then I might be wrong with my appetite. And that is the first and fundamental ingredient that I'm going to look at if I'm going to rebalance or sell my portfolio. So that is what I'm primarily looking at. And if you look at gold at this point, it is a bit overextended. It doubled in the past 2 to 3 years, where it wouldn't be strange to say, well, gold is going to have a slight period of sideways action, before it continues to expand. I think I'm a gold bull for the next 5 to 10 years, but that doesn't mean that it can't have corrections of 6 months to 12 months in between before it continues to move. It's very unusual for gold to have such an expansion as the one that we've just seen. And I think that it's getting to the short-term peak where a lot of profit taking is going to be taking place. And if you think about the investor mindset, then if you were holding gold as a risk-off appetite that has been yielding a massive return to the upside in terms of standard deviation to the upside, way bigger than the average return, I think a lot of investors will be scraping it off and are going to look for potential investment opportunities outside of that scope, which is probably a lot of things in equity markets. But also, if Ethereum is validated as an actual asset that the governments are going to be using, or DeFi or any blue chips there, it might make sense to allocate a little bit towards those assets, and that little allocation is going to trigger a lot of upside. And I think the same can be said for Bitcoin. So that's my thesis here. If we look at the altcoins, then we can see that we are slightly crawling upwards, and some of them have seen the largest capitulation candle in history. For instance, Optimism has been seeing one, and it's currently still moving beneath the actual crucial resistance. So we had the crash, retest the low, and start crawling back upwards. And I assume that this is going to continue, where once we get towards this resistance point, then all of a sudden we break all the way towards the other side of the range. And that's already more than a 2x for me. And that, including that the smaller altcoins will likely outperform the bigger ones, that point is for me to already be in profit. So I'm fine, because I think that once the nature changes on the altcoins will be good. If Optimism is going to continue having its fall, then I need to reassess my thesis, and that reassessing of the thesis is need to be done primarily through my thesis on Bitcoin and ETH, which I'll get to in a little bit. If you look at Optimism versus Bitcoin, then we could say that at this point we are on a cycle low, and being on a cycle low is either going to tell me that it's dead, or it's giving me the absolute best opportunity to invest in. And I think that the latter is actually the case because of the arguments that I've provided at the beginning. Now, if we look at the higher time frame thesis for the markets, which is in this case Bitcoin for reference, then as long as Bitcoin keeps on having this trend, which means I would like to see it stay above the all-time high of 2021. As long as that is the case, and I assume that we're not even going to come back towards the range lows or the lows that we've seen in the previous period, because I think that we will be having a gradual upwards move, just like we have been seeing in the previous period of consolidation. If that is the case, I'm good. If we drop beneath 70 to 65K, that is where I might be saying I've been wrong and I need to reassess my portfolio. And that is going to be a very painful thesis, but that's how far I'm willing to go when it comes to those altcoins that I'm currently having. Now, when we look at the other altcoins, I've been having some complaints from the audience that I'm currently still focused on Celestia, for instance, but Celestia is actually breaking back up from this entire construction. This is ready to break to the upside, and the USDT pair of this actual asset is just nicely consolidating here. So I'm good. For the past few months, I'm actually good when this one is just consolidating. I think that once we break 425, we're going to run all the way towards $9 to $10, and then again, I'm in profit. Then final case is Wormhole. I saw some comments from you guys saying, hey, thank you for this tip. I've made some profit. Congratulations. Once again, if you're following me and you decided for yourself and you think these projects are good to have in your portfolio, go ahead. Once again, it's my journey. I hope that the fundamental layer of what I'm saying in the TA and my portfolio rebalancing is something that you can learn from. You might be having a different view on those things or my actual assets. That's fine. However, Wormhole is still making a bullish divergence. It made the first move, and given that I'm looking at Wormhole against Bitcoin, I think that once this rotates and we break back in the range, the actual peak is a 5 to 7x from here. That might indicate that if Bitcoin is going to go up by 30% and Wormhole goes up against Bitcoin by 5x, we might be doing a 6.5 to 10x on our Wormhole position. So the question was, are you going to take profits? No. And the question is, as long as this bullish divergence is fine, I don't need to reassess my portfolio. Ultimately, the question is, should I add stop losses to my portfolio or all my positions? It's a question being asked a lot. In my opinion, I don't believe I need to, because that would make me a day trader, and I think you should be very strict on your strategy. You should be avoiding any confusion there. So if there are very wide stop losses, for instance, during the previous crash that we witnessed, and I would have been stopped out around the actual low and the markets bounce back up, then I'm buying back in way higher, but my thesis didn't change. So if my thesis didn't change, then I shouldn't be having stop losses. I should be working on a different strategy, which I have been developing over the years, which works for me. And if you have stop losses with your portfolio, go ahead. If that works, then fine, then just use that. So in that sense, it comes down to, in my opinion, the fundamental thesis. And when that is correct, there's not much that we need to worry about at this point. We can be wrong, and we can be wrong for a long time. But I know that the moment that we are right, it's going to yield me a return substantially higher than the times that we were wrong. And it's actually not about being wrong or right. It's just about having a strategy and an execution plan that's good. So ultimately, it's a screenshot of time. I'm sure that we're going to be having a lot of fun. My goal is to share my journey, to have a consistent return on my portfolio over the years. I have a long-term horizon. I think that's what you should be doing as well. I'll see you again on Sunday. Ciao.